Not quite. Not quite. It's on James for some reason and not me. Stop. It says it's still preparing. Come on. Yep. And we are live on Facebook, which is awesome. All right. My name is Peter Franzen. I want to welcome everybody who's here on our, I don't know, 6th week of Seeing Cares. It's our Facebook Live series to help you get through the coronavirus epidemic, especially when it relates to education. And we want to continue to encourage people to practice all the recommendations regarding the virus so that we can get through this quickly. And I really want to remind everyone that we are going to be taking questions tonight, throughout the night. You can do that on the comments section if you're watching us here on Facebook. And I'll be watching that here on my phone as soon as it starts to come through as live, and I can watch that with you. And we have a great conversation tonight. Tonight, our guests are going to help us check in with private schools. I think that for many people, if not most people, when you say the education system, you know, the default image is to think of the traditional state-run public schools. However, the education system is really much more than that, and it's changing all the time. It was already growing and changing before the coronavirus outbreak, but now it's rapidly changing as nearly every place in the country is grappling with challenges of operating during a pandemic and the corresponding shutdowns and all the stay-at-home orders. In Missouri, there's about 1 in 10 school-aged children attending a Missouri non-public school. That's roughly 90 to 100,000 kids. So to really consider the education system in Missouri, you have to understand the role of private schools, virtual schools, and homeschooling, along with traditional public school districts to get the full picture. To help us think about and understand non-public schools in Missouri, I've invited 3 people I know who are intimately familiar with non-public education, and each brings a different perspective to the conversation. I am going to introduce them to you. First of all, Dr. James Schules is an assistant professor at the College of Education at the University of Missouri at St. Louis, and he's the program director for the Educational Leadership and Policy Study programs there. Nicolette Gibson is the executive director of the Missouri chapter of the Council on American Private Education, or CAPE. And since this is Missouri, her organization is known as MoCAPE. And Nicolette is also the special education / federal programs director for the Kansas City Catholic Diocese. And our third guest is Dr. Kimberly Gill. Dr. Gill is the academic dean at Summit Christian Academy in Lee Summit, Missouri, outside of Kansas City. And Dr. Gill is passionate about her choice to work in a private school, and she's an advocate for increasing access to private schools for more families in Missouri. So welcome, everybody. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you're welcome.
you.
That was a lot, right? You need,
Peter, my one suggestion is that you need a Brady Bunch themed, song where we can all, look to our right, look down, and all that sort of thing. That would be terrific. Are you trying to add a song now?
No, just, I appreciate that idea. That's awesome. Well, I'm trying. I really want to remind you. Oh, there I am on Facebook Live on my phone. Hi, Del Rio. So we tonight talking about private schools. But before we begin, and I hope I kind of laid a little groundwork there. I want to give you each a chance to maybe address a myth or two surrounding non-public schools. So can we just kind of go around the table? I don't know who wants to start. Dr. Gill, do you
Sure.
have a myth?
Sure. Well, some of the things that I've heard that are myths over the years are things like everybody that attends private school is rich. Certainly not the truth. My kids go there. And so there's lots of ways that families have managed to secure funding to attend and find what's best for their children. Perhaps another myth is that private school is anti-public school system, and nothing could be further from the truth. Basically, I believe what we're all working for is a best case scenario for each child. We know that not every school can meet every need. And so private schools are just another opportunity, and typically they specialize in different areas. For our particular school, faith-based is very important, but we want each child to experience the best education they can possibly have. So that would be two myths I would share.
No, those are good ones. Nicolette Gibson, you work with a bunch of schools all across the state who are members of MOCAPE, so you are involved in this. What are some myths that you know about relative to private schools?
I think a little bit more onto what Kimberly was saying is the myth that all private schools are the same. So MOCAPE represents 80,000 private school students in our state, and they come from faith-based schools, Christian, Catholic, Lutheran, Jewish, as well as independent schools that are not religiously affiliated or might be religiously affiliated. And so there's a lot of diversity. Our students and families and community of learners all look really different, and they represent Missouri, no matter where they are.
And James, do you have a take on this? What you do a lot of research and analysis of education data. What do you know about private schools?
To add to what Nicolette was saying, I mean, people have this perception of private schools as being, all rich or whatever, and there's a tremendous diversity. I mean, there are some private schools where the tuition is astronomical and they're very selective, and there are others where most students are paying next to nothing in tuition, where almost all students are scholarshiped. And so there's tremendous diversity among the schools. Another thing that I run into, my primary job is working at the University of Missouri St. Louis, teaching people who want to be principals and superintendents. These are almost all teachers in public schools. And they have this assumption that private school teachers make more money. That's not the truth at all. On average, private school teachers make less than traditional public school teachers. So I think that's an important myth that people sometimes get mixed up. I think that this private schools are rich thing applies to all the people, all the schools, all the teachers, and it's simply not the case.
Right, good one. Okay, well, let's, and I want to remind people that they're watching SEAM Cares on Facebook Live, and that if you have questions about anything that you hear for any of the panelists, please put them in the comments section. Hi, Carmen. Hi, Sandra. Hi, Del Rio. Hi, Laura. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, Cece. Just a little engagement with our audience out there. We're glad that you're listening and learning with us. And our guests today, Dr. Gill, Nicolette Gibson, James Schulz. I'd like to catch the audience up a little bit on what's been happening in private schools since the pandemic has taken effect. So Kimberly, let me ask you about specifically, your experience at Summit Christian Academy. What's a real life example? How has your school responded to the whole thing, the social and emotional needs of students and families, to the educational needs of your students? Are there ways that your school has responded to the broader community? What's happening at your school?
Well, if it's one thing we've learned, God is faithful in the storm, for sure. We have learned to partner in new ways. I think private schools especially pride themselves on partnering with parents as the primary educator in the family. And we have opportunity to grow that we weren't expecting, but our magnificent, amazing, heroic teachers, like so many teachers around the state, have pivoted quickly to find what works best for their students as they've now grown in online learning and online education. Lots of words that I've heard kicked around, things like transformation, being nimble. That's one of the benefits of private education. We can pivot pretty quickly without a lot of strings attached and really try to figure out what's best for individual students. One of the concepts that we've focused on a lot at Summit Christian is high touch. like all teachers, we miss our kids. And so figuring out ways that we can reach out and support them, not just academically, but also you mentioned that social emotional piece as people get locked in their homes together. Mom and dad a lot of times are working at home also. And so I know at my house, we have 5 people on computers in different rooms, and it's kind of crazy. But different things that we've done, we have an audio devotion book that we wrote. So we are releasing a devotion a day to just encourage parents' hearts as they are jumping into this homeschool mentality. We have our counselors have created videos for parents on how to talk with their students about difficult topics that come up as a result of students hearing things on television, elementary students, or overhearing parents talking, or even mom or dad losing a job or being furloughed in this time, or somebody being sick. Those are scary things. And we wanted to really empower our parents to help their children give their feelings an actual name. Also just tapping into that faith component, having chapels still. We didn't just pivot with our education piece, but have our chapels going with different speakers coming in just to inspire students and inspire adults as well. Educationally, question?
Well, I was going to ask Kimberly, and your school was already, you were about to say that educationally, your school was already using Chromebooks and working online. And
We have
were
been
able to leverage that?
We had decided to start the technology education really at 3rd grade. We're a little different than other schools in that preschool through 2nd grade. We really wanted to focus on face-to-face contact, which is amazing for students until you have to pivot to online. And so in the preschool all the way to 2nd grade, we use an agenda that parents get, and they have hyperlinks embedded in there for different videos. I like to tease a little bit. At first, my teachers were nervous about making videos. Now they have handheld microphones and they are all over it, and they are adorable as they're teaching their lessons from home. And some are still coming up to the school in the isolation of their classroom just to have comfort for the students that way. 4th through 6th grade, we're using Google Classrooms, and a lot of the teachers had already been using that. We have Chromebooks for the students. Junior high through 12th grade, we were blessed to have started using Canvas, which is a learning platform many colleges across the nations use, and we had just started that this year. So at semester, we had several junior high teachers hear so much about it from the high school that they wanted on it. So by the time we had to pivot to all online, I only had 6 secondary teachers that hadn't used Canvas. And so teachers coming together, unifying, schools supporting one another has been an exciting outcome. And just to help us maintain high expectations, one of my kind of themes through this has been school is one of the anchors of life. And so when everything else is going crazy, that steady, consistent expectation surrounded in grace is critical to students feeling confident. So that's been our goal. We have not dropped a single objective and have moved forward full sail.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Nicolette, let me ask you again, you know, working with so many schools around the state, how are schools responding? You know, we wouldn't be having this conversation if people already understood the nature of private schools and non-public schools and what's happening. How are schools responding to, you know, the CARES Act, to federal relief? Are they advocating? How are they taking action to survive?
Well, I think, you know, just to speak to our diversity again, when this first started, all of our schools jumped in with both feet, but it looked really different. So some of our schools, I think everybody first wanted to check in with families and ensure everybody was safe and healthy and that their needs were being met. We have many schools that provide nutritional services to students, and we're set up as nutritional distribution sites and continue to provide food for our students to make sure that they're getting those needs met. We also had to do a lot of assessment of technology. So some of our schools are really blessed, like Kimberly's, to have students with one-to-one devices, but many of our schools are not, or the families do not have technology in the home or internet access. And so really making sure that we started with the most prepared students we could to be able to give them the education that they deserve. And I think we've just seen a real innovation in lots of different situations, making sure kids get what they need. As far as, accessing all of the resources out there, many of our schools did apply for PPP loans. We spent a lot of time making sure that there weren't going to be strings attached, that we would be able to keep our autonomy and independence as private schools. And we wanted that assurance. And so because our schools are tuition based, many of them or get support from a parish or church, which were all closed during the shutdown, and therefore tithing and giving in those places went down, then it was really important for our schools to educate themselves and take advantage of, any of those supports that would allow us to keep schools open, because we don't want students to have even more upheaval if their school closes and suddenly now, as Kimberly was talking about, this is a stable force in their life. And if we can't keep our doors open, then we're not able to provide that stable learning and that education for kids. So we're continuing to look at CARES Act and waiting for guidance, but we work hand in hand with our state agencies and local agencies to make sure that our private schools are getting access to those funds as well.
Got it. James, let me ask you, what do you see as sort of the organizational challenges for non-public schools that hope to survive this crisis? Because it is that level, we talked about the 2008 recession and the kinds of numbers that we saw impacting private schools around the state. This could be worse, 40 million people around the country out of work. What's your take on that?
Well, if I could, first I want to kind of comment on some of the things that they said really quickly. I have 2 kids in public school and 2 kids in private school. My 2 older children are 8th and 9th grade, are in public schools that are one-to-one with technology. They have Chromebooks, right? They've been on those platforms all year. My 2 kids in the private school are at a school that we chose because they don't use very much technology, right? It's a classical program. They do a lot of, recitation, memorizing poetry and speeches and all kinds of wonderful things that I love, but they're not high technology. Let me just say, it's been tough in both circumstances, adjusting to what we're going through right now, right? So no one's doing it perfectly right. And no one's doing it completely wrong. I mean, we're all trying to figure this out. And so I think that's one thing we need to keep to be aware of, is everyone's figuring this out together. It's not like homeschooling, because you have parents still working full-time jobs, oftentimes trying to do their jobs and trying to educate their kids. It's a very tough environment for everyone. So I just want to toss that out first. But I was thinking in terms of like the logistics and what we need to be planning for, the biggest challenge here is uncertainty. We don't know. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We know that it's probably not going to be good, right? We know that we're probably going to have some losses to our budgets. We don't know what that's going to be. We don't know, like as Nicolette's saying, what level the tithes are going to be down, and so the church support for private schools might be down. We don't know what percentage of our parents are going to be out of jobs and not be able to come back next year because they can't afford tuition, or we don't have the scholarships to support them. That's the biggest challenge right now, is the not known.
Right.
Another big challenge that I see, and Kim touched on this a little bit, it's parents choose private schools for a reason. They choose private schools oftentimes because there's something that they see in that school that gives them something different from what they're getting somewhere else, right? There's a mission, there's a vision, there's an instructional or pedagogical practice, whatever it is, they choose it. They choose Kim's school because the faith-based component, or they choose my school, my kid's school, the Classical Academy de Lafayette, because it's a classical approach. Right, we choose these things for a reason. And if we're not able to meet in our regular patterns, how do we give parents what they signed up for?
Right.
How do we give them that component that was different from what they were getting other places? And I think that's a really important thing for schools to consider, for school leaders to consider at this time.
Yeah.
What does, I saw Nicolette and Kim, I saw you nodding your heads. I mean, what does planning for the fall look like right now for some of these non-public schools around the state?
You know, Peter, I was thinking a lot about that myth that you were asking about earlier. And I think one myth is that private schools don't have special education students. And that's really a myth. In our Kansas City area, about 10% of our students enrolled in Catholic schools have special education identified needs. And so I've seen teachers step up and provide through Zoom and through packets and meeting, you know, whatever ways that's working best for students to provide that additional support for special needs students. But I just met with my teachers today and we were talking about how does this look long term, especially for our kids who might not do real well with technology, who didn't choose that path. And we don't know, like James said, the uncertainty of how this is going to play out. So I'm really preparing my teams that we need to plan for 18 to 24 months of possible shutdowns, maybe some stops and starts, maybe some half enrollments to keep numbers down in school buildings. And so I think a lot of focus was spent on shutting our schools down and how does that look and how do we provide support to our students in now that we're shut down. And now we're starting to shift and school leaders are really starting to look at the challenges of reopening and what those continued challenges are going to be as we might have to pull back and pull in back and forth for a while. And not forgetting that not every student has, you know, think of all the things we've already discussed, meals at home, technology, parents available to help with schooling, may have disabilities or challenges that present even more difficulties. And so we're really looking at each individual student, trying to figure out the best supports that we can put in place to make sure that their needs are met. And also at the same time, providing support for our teachers. This is really hard for teachers. It's some of the hardest parts of teaching that we do because we love our kids without all the fun stuff of being able to interact and get that feedback and love and attention that we love to get from them. And so making sure that we're having lots of team meetings and teachers are getting the support that they need in this time too.
Right.
Yeah, I was a first grade teacher. Being a first grade teacher without getting the hugs every day sounds terrible.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Kimberly, is that what it looks like at your school? I mean, you don't have to divulge any state secrets, but I mean, as you sit with your board and your leadership team and you start thinking about the fall, what are all the contingencies that you have to think about?
Right. Well, you know, you pray for the best and you plan for the worst. Proverbs talks about considering the ant. You want to be organized and prepared. And so we're running lots of different scenarios, different budget scenarios. We want to be compassionate. Number one is to let our families and our students know we love them. And what does compassion look like? We're continuing also working on different models. We've had parents reach out that are going to be missionaries and say, hey, could we take SCAE campus with us? So just exploring right now, since school is moving forward and things have settled pretty much with the online, it's really about that what's next. And I appreciated what James said in that there's so many question marks. And so you're really planning down multiple different roads educationally without overtaxing your teachers who will give and give and give until they drop. And so even trying to put boundaries in place, you shouldn't be answering emails after 10 or, you know, even earlier than that, because that is their heart to just pour out into their students. So what does that really look like? And then another piece is that advocacy piece, Peter, that SEAM is so outstanding. I think sometimes as private education, we're so caught up in the day-to-day that we forget that 10,000 foot view. And so important to be writing our legislators. I emailed Teresa Vilmer, our ombudsman, and just said, hey, what's going on with the CARES Fund? Do we know what's happening? Copying in my local public school also, just to make sure they know we are here and we know that there should be funding available for us so our teachers can get more online professional development. We can secure more equipment for our students and our teachers. But that takes that click on your computer to send an email just to let your voice be heard. The public system is super, super good at advocacy, and we are playing catch up in that. So I think that's another part of this puzzle.
And I think it's where some of those relationships we've worked really hard to build over time, like Kimberly was saying. So in Missouri, we have a non-public work group. Our MOCAPE board, several of the members sit on the non-public work group. I work hand in hand with our ombuds, Teresa Vilmer, to really make sure that we have good consultation happening, that we have good communication happening between public schools and their private school counterparts. And now's going to be the time to really reap the benefits of all that work for these years, because this is going to be the time when communication and partnership and relationship really matter. And so I think that it's important to continue those conversations. We're waiting on guidance. There's so many questions, but knowing that we know who to go to, we have some systems in place for people to work through what consultation looks like, because we do that for title programs, we do that for special education services for kids. And so we do have some frameworks that we're going to depend on now. And, those relationships Kimberly's built with legislators, all of those things, when MOCAPE sent in a letter to the governor on behalf of all of our students, we want to make sure that people remember us, but we're not strangers. We do have partnerships with all of these people. And I think that now will be the time to really draw on those relationships.
James, I know you've studied a lot of the economics and the numbers behind this, and I don't think people really necessarily get how non-public schools can be part of the solution when we're facing an economic crisis by virtue of actually providing education, cheaper. Can you talk a little bit about how, non-public schools can be part of the solution here as we move forward? And
well, I think it goes to what you said at the beginning, is recognizing that they're a part of it already, right? They're a part of the system already. And part of the problem, I think, is that people have this notion of public education just being public schools. But when I think about public education, I think about all kinds of ways that we can deliver an education to people, at public expense. And that could include private schools. Right now in Missouri, we have separate systems where public schools are funded by tax dollars. They're funded by your local property taxes, your state income taxes, all of those things. And private schools are funded separately by private tuition dollars and philanthropic dollars and whatnot, with some small programs, as we've heard. But in many states, we have state-supported programs that help families attend private schools with some sort of state scholarship, whether you call it a voucher or an education savings account or whatever it is. And in almost every single circumstance, when you see these programs, they generate cost savings. And so when you talk about being part of the solution or part of a way to help, a scholarship program like this that gives a student $6,000 to attend a private school when we would have spent on average roughly $10,000 for them to be in the traditional public schools, right? You're generating savings in that place. So I think that's one way in which it's possible for private schools to be part of the fiscal solution. But I think we also need to recognize that this is going to have long-lasting impacts in all of our systems going forward. When thinking about the 2008 recession, right? We still haven't fully caught up in terms of public school teacher salaries. This is going to have broad effects. And so we need to be looking at a lot of different things. And I think a private school scholarship program should be part of what we're doing.
Well, I want to remind people that you've been sitting here watching SEAM Cares, and I'm going to ask our panel a final question here in a minute to look into the future and reflect on that. If you have any questions, I want to recognize, that a lot of our parent advocates, Crystal and Carmen and Del Rio, and Keith down in Sykeston. Am I right about that, Keith? Hi, Keith, and as well as Carmen, who I may have just said already once. And if you have any last questions here, but before we go, I want to ask our panelists to one by one, kind of just what do you see happening? Changes. I'm not going to limit you, however you want to think about this, but what do you think the future holds, Kimberly, looking ahead?
I think it's exciting. I think we're blowing the lid and the sides off the box. and that suddenly schools like Summit Christian Academy and other awesome private schools are not going to be limited by brick and mortar. That this has forced us a little faster perhaps than we would like, but to think outside the box, to be creative, and the potential and the ability for technology to individualize education is exciting. Never, never do we want to lose the human touch. That connection is primary to education. But I'm excited at the opportunity to reach more kids. So that's what I see the future holding, more opportunity for more children.
Nicolette, I saw you there. What is your take? What do you think is going to happen?
I have been so excited just to see parents engaged in a whole new way in their children's learning. I think the appreciation for what happens in the school, in the classroom, what teachers are providing, the service they give to our community, our students and families will be really remembered in a whole new way now. I also see teachers learning new things and having such compassion and empathy for their students. I've had so many teachers say to me, I forgot how hard it is to learn new things. And when we step back and realize that's what our kids do all day, is come into a building and learn new things, I think we're having a new perspective from many different vantage points, and understanding and appreciation for the hard work that goes into educating students, the hard work that our kids do, that our teachers do, the support that our parents provide. And so I really hope that we come out of this stronger, bonded, stronger together with a real appreciation and understanding for each other's struggles.
Amen. Well, and James, looking ahead, what are your thoughts?
Well, number one, I think they've touched on some important things. I think parents, looking at it from a parent perspective, I think we're going to see a huge appreciation for teachers. Like, teaching kids at home is pretty stinking tough.
Yeah.
I also think you're going to see different impacts for different people. I mean, it's hard to paint with too broad a brush. For some people, I've heard stories that this is an amazing experience. They're loving getting to work with their children. And so they may explore more hybrid homeschooling type models or homeschooling or whatever it is. You have other parents saying, this is terrible, get my kids back at school as soon as possible, right? So it's going to affect people differently. But one thing that I think is amazing, and we've touched on it already, Kimberly touched on some of the new things that they're doing. Sorry, it's raining here. The rain's coming in. My wife's closing the windows for me.
That's okay. One of your kids was trying to get in the back door there behind you too.
She's a wonderful helper. Yeah, the kids are locked outside in the rain. That's a joke. But what I'm amazed at, and what happens in times like this, is people innovate. People do new things. So I told you my kid's school is a classical school that does not typically rely on technology. And one of the things they've done is they created quickly this new online model called the Cato Academy, where people could choose one course that they're offering, right? So my head of school is now teaching a course for elementary school students, one hour course, or I don't know how they describe it. I think of 1 credit hour because I'm a college professor, but one course on phonics for young children, where they can go live and be with a person and learn phonics instruction, because so many schools don't do phonics instruction, right? So she's innovating in a way and doing something different. And that's what happens in times of pressure like this. Yeah. Schools start figuring things out and creating new things. And there are lots of possibilities. There are some struggles ahead. Some private schools might close, but some are going to do some really innovative things. And in the long run, I think things are going to be looking pretty cool and pretty amazing in the future as we see these innovations come to fruition.
Well, I think maybe we're going to leave it on that somewhat optimistic note there from James. I want to thank everyone. When you guys, when you go watch this later, you can see that there was a lot of support from our parents in the comments section for what you were saying, which is awesome. Next week, well, first I want to remind folks, if you're still looking up any kind of COVID-related resources, we have the sceneteam.org/COVID resource page. Next week, we're going to bring back a guest from our first panel, Brian Evans. He's going to be joined by Anita Wilson from the Awareness Institute. They're both mental health counselors, and they're going to help us revisit it and go a little more in depth on that conversation about mental health right now during COVID. Again, I want to thank our panelists here.
We didn't get the booze.
You guys are great. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Peter.
Bye, Peter.